Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting in the tax collector's booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." So Matthew got up and followed him. Then it happened that as Jesus was reclining at table in Matthew's house, and many tax collectors and sinners had come and were dining with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why is your rabbi eating with the tax collectors and sinners?" But when Jesus heard this, he said, "It is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire compassion and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." My brothers and sisters, the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I'm getting spoiled by having Deacon Tony cart me around everywhere. But I'm so happy to be with you this morning. The psalmist writes these words, "If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts." Will you say that with me? If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts.
Why don't we sing it?
Oh, you can sing it.
If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts.
Now I forgot my entire Today we have the joy and the privilege of celebrating the feast day of St. Matthew the Apostle. You notice the big icon on the front of the cross there of St. Matthew. We wanted to remind you of how important he is to us, so we hung his picture there. I doubt if he actually looked like that. But we really don't know what he looked like. But anyway, St. Matthew is very important to our church. He is our patron saint. And so we celebrate him today. And we use the color red. And the reason we use the color red is red stands for saints who are martyrs, saints who died and gave their lives for the cause. St. Matthew was numbered among the martyrs. That's why we have red as our color today. St. Matthew, every year we celebrate this feast because he's the patron of our community, of our parish. And I give you a little biographical sketch of what we know about St. Matthew. I'm not going to do that today. I'm hoping you already are familiar with his story. But anyway, how many tax collectors do we have here this morning? Raise your hand. No one works for the IRS that's here? We got to do a better job at reaching people. How many prostitutes do we have? Well, I want to tell you something. If you're a tax collector or if you're a prostitute, you're welcome in this this place. And it's not because it's my idea or your idea. It is because it's the idea of Jesus. He wants to include everyone at his dinner party. The story of Matthew is really our story. It's a story of hearing the voice of Christ and leaving everything to follow him. Now, when I was about 15 years of age, back in the summer of 1971, I decided at that point to follow Jesus for some reason. I was a teenager. I didn't know what I was doing. So I thought, I'll be a follower of Jesus. I had no idea where that would lead. It probably led me to this moment that I'm sitting here with you in his church. So the reason I followed Jesus is because I was so inspired by his story. And what happened was, I decided in the summer of 1971, I'm going to read the Bible, the whole thing. Have you ever made that decision? I'm going to read the Bible someday and I'll read the whole thing. Well, every person that's ever told me that has started reading the Bible, but they never finished. And so I didn't want to be among those. I wanted to read the whole thing. So I went and got a paperback Bible, because they had those in 1971. But the problem was, when I opened it up, it wasn't the whole Bible, it was just the New Testament. Have you seen those? Just the paperback New Testament. So I started reading it. And I started reading in the Gospel according to St. Matthew. This is the first Gospel that turns up in the New Testament. So I read the entire Gospel of St. Matthew. And when I read the Gospel and I set the book down, I was 15 years of age. I was amazed. I was amazed at the story that I just read. So much so that I decided that I would become a follower of Jesus. That was in 1971. I did that. So I remembered the words of the psalmist. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. I heard the voice of Jesus. And I heard the voice of Jesus through the Gospel of St. Matthew. Matthew is very important to me as a result. Matthew's Gospel led me into faith. And I heard the voice of Christ through the Gospel. What I came to realize when I was 15 years old is that not everybody hears the voice of Jesus. I thought everyone would hear the voice of Jesus, but not everyone does. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. And so I remembered those words of the psalmist. And I was so taken and inspired by the Gospel of Matthew. Now Matthew is the patron saint of tax collectors, etc., for obvious reasons. But he's also, I believe, the patron saint of inclusive Christianity. Because as far as Matthew was concerned, Jesus came for everybody. How many agree with Matthew on that? Jesus came for everybody. And so Matthew proclaims the gospel of Jesus. And when Jesus came to him in Capernaum one day, he looked down at Matthew and he said, "Come, follow me." And Matthew immediately got up and followed Jesus. Now, there is an artist of the Renaissance, an Italian artist named Caravaggio. I know about him not because I'm really smart. I know about him because Tony and Mary Battaglia gave me a book with his collected artwork. That's the only reason I can sound so intelligent this morning and drop his name, Caravaggio, like I know something. Anyway, Caravaggio painted a great Renaissance masterpiece painting of this story of the calling of Matthew. And in the painting, you see Jesus is standing there to the right of the painting. And he has his hand extended, and he's pointing his finger. And the light of the painting is shining on his hand and his finger. So your eyes are immediately drawn to the hand of Jesus as he's pointing. And then as I was looking at this painting, I wondered what Jesus was pointing at. And he was pointing to a group of men who were sitting around a table, all dressed in the finest of Italian Renaissance clothing. Because the artist was Italian, he had no idea what people were wearing in the first century. And sitting at this table was a very wealthy man, dressed in very fine clothing. And his name was Matthew. And so Jesus is pointing his finger at this group of men sitting around a table, and he's pointing to Matthew, if you follow the finger. And Matthew is looking at Jesus in this painting, and he's gesturing to himself, saying, "Who, me? If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts." Matthew heard the voice of Christ, and Matthew responded, and he became, at that moment, a follower of Jesus immediately. He became a disciple. What's the first thing that Matthew does? Is he throws a dinner party. Why did he throw a dinner party? Well, first of all, he could afford it. He was very rich. Why was Matthew so very rich? Because he was a very greedy man. He liked money. And so he invited all of his friends over for a party at his house. And he had the nicest house in Capernaum because he was the richest man of the town. And so he invited all his friends. No one would come. They hated Matthew. No one would come. Have you ever thrown a party and invited people and no one shows up? So Matthew invited all his cronies and friends, all his fellow tax collectors. And they can't have a party without women, so they invited a lot of prostitutes over. And then they invited Jesus, and Jesus came to this party, and he was criticized for it because of the marginalized sinners that came to Matthew's party. Did you know something? You cannot become a disciple of Jesus unless you are a sinner. Did you know that? That's a prerequisite. Jesus doesn't want righteous people. He wants sinners like me. And I want to say you. He just wants regular people who have problems and who have been taken over by weakness and sin. And so Jesus always taught his disciples in such a way that you have to be a sinner in order to be a follower of Jesus first. That's what Jesus is saying. Isn't that outrageous? Religious people don't like that at all. Because religious people, and I'm a religious person, we work so hard at being so good and religious. We don't want God letting anyone in for free. That's offensive. I worked so hard to make it this far. I don't want these other people included. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. Now, on a couple of occasions, I've invited Pentecostal preachers to come and preach here at St. Matthew Church. Do you remember that? I like Pentecostal preachers. It happens to be something I like. And the reason I like them is because they're really good preachers. They preach with such passion. Remember Bishop Andy Bills, who came here and preached the gospel to us? I was so taken by his preaching ability. So then, there was another Pentecostal preacher I had come and preach to us here at St. Matthew. You may not remember this. This was a few years ago. I invited a man by the name of Ralph Wilkerson to come to our church to preach to our community. And you know something he did? He came with his wife. He was quite elderly. He was in his 90s. And he sat not in a wheelchair, but they sat him in a chair here, and he preached to us here at St. Matthew's. Now, who was Ralph Wilkerson? Some of you might remember David Wilkerson, who wrote The Cross and the Switchblade. But Ralph is a different Wilkerson. He was the founder pastor of a great big mega church in Anaheim. And people came from miles around. He played a very instrumental role in the charismatic renewal of the 1970s. Isn't that right, Eleanor, Dr. Eleanor?
Sure did.
And when he was preaching here, he said something that struck me. He said to all of us sitting here in the church, he says, make friends with everybody. And then introduce them to your best friend, Jesus. That's exactly what Matthew did. Matthew invited all his friends to his house for a dinner party, and he introduced them to his new friend, Jesus. And it changed everything for Matthew. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. So Matthew became a follower of Jesus, and who knows who else became a follower of Jesus at this dinner party. Well, you know something? We here at St. Matthew's, we believe in the message of Matthew. That's why we call ourselves the community of St. Matthew. And every Sunday morning, we throw a dinner party for Jesus, and we want to introduce Jesus to you. That's why you're here. You're an invited guest to the party of Jesus. How do you like that? That's a good thing. So if today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. So anyway, I share this with you because St. Matthew is our patron, and he has invited us to come to this Eucharistic table, which is open to everyone, and to share a banquet feast with Jesus. That's the call of Matthew to us. That's the challenge. And so he becomes the patron saint of inclusivity, because everyone's included. Everyone's invited. No one's excluded. This is why at St. Matthew's he is our patron saint. This is why many of you who are sitting in this church today are not welcomed in other churches, but you're welcomed here. You're welcome here. We have people from all kinds of backgrounds and diversity in this community, and it's because of one reason only, because of the hospitality and invitation of Christ. That's why you're here. You think you made the decision to be here and sit in that chair. The fact of the matter, it was pre-appointed. The voice of Jesus spoke to you, and that's why you're really here. So now it's time to pay attention, because he's calling you to follow him and to become his disciple. And if you do that like Matthew, it will change everything. It will transform your entire life. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. And my brothers and sisters, that's the gospel of the Lord. Amen.